Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. In a significant development, North Korea state media has for the first time reported on the ongoing political turmoil in South Korea, including President Yoon Suk Yeol's brief declaration of martial law and the opposition's push for his impeachment. North Korean outlets, referring to the incident as shocking, accused Yoon of causing nationwide chaos, describing his actions as being those of a fascist dictatorship that wreaked havoc across South Korea. The reports detail the December 3rd martial law declaration, its rapid revocation, and the dismissal of an impeachment motion last Saturday. It also highlighted large civic rallies demanding Yoon's impeachment. The North Korean media framed the incident as exposing the vulnerabilities within South Korea's society and warned that Yoon's political future may be in jeopardy. For more on this, we invite our go-to North Korean expert in the studio, Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of National Security Strategy. Thank you for coming in, Dr.
Good to be here.
And also joining us is Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation online. Great to have you, Dr. Klinger.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's start with Dr. Go. So like I've said, North Korea has finally broken silence and reported on the situation in South Korea for the first time in 7 days. What would be the reason for North Korea's short silence, and what about its detailed reporting on this lately?
Well, I think it's indeed a very interesting question. Why the delay? And I suspect it's because North Korea the regime has some trouble coming up with a coherent narrative to explain the situation to the North Korean public as well as the North Korean officialdom, which is the main audience of the Nodong Sinmun and the North Korean media. I think the problem for the North Korean was that somehow the concept of the balance of check and balances, the legislative branch, which is the National Assembly here, overriding the executive decision of the president, it's very foreign to North Koreans. North Koreans have lived, they only know one political system, the system of Juche, the Suryang, the ultimate absolute dictatorship of the Kim family. So somehow looking at this conflict of power, even though it's conflict, creates disorder and all that, indeed, it's actually unknown in North Korea. So in that sense, I think it was very difficult for the regime to process first, and then coming out with an explanation that could be understood by the North Korean public. And also therein lies the danger, because while you explain the situation, the ongoing situation in Korea, you don't want to inspire people with wrong ideas. Of
course, yes.
Because it's about the people checking on the power of the leader, which is what democracy is about. So I think the North Korean regime was very careful, trying a very fine line between characterizing South Korea being in chaos and then also withholding criticism of Yoon Suk Yeol, surprisingly, because then you essentially illustrating ways for the public to somehow check the power of the leadership. So I think this is the reason why it took the delay, and I think it's also interesting that the North Korean media is focusing on the disorder aspect rather than the aspect we are focusing on, which for many of us here in Seoul and Korea and elsewhere in the world, the characteristic feature of what's going on right now is one of the democratic resilience.
Right.
Somehow the system failed, but the system was able to recover and essentially self-heal the damage that was being caused. But then the North Koreans are not focusing on that. They're instead focusing on the disorder aspect. So I think that's the angle they're taking in order to explain the situation to themselves.
Right, so they had a dilemma, but they decided to highlight the disorder in the country now. Now, to Professor Klinger, Professor, how do you think North Korea is interpreting the declaration of state of emergency in South Korea and the resulting political turmoil, especially with President Yoon Suk Yeol actually mentioning the need to eradicate pro-North anti-state forces during his martial law declaration speech?
I agree with Dr. Go. I think they see it both as a shocking development, and I think it took so long for them to provide a response because they had to interpret it and identify what themes they wanted to push. So on the one hand, they would see it as an opportunity for propaganda victories. They can highlight the instability of South Korea, the actions of President Yoon as being dictatorial and fascist. And they see opportunities there to exploit that. And they would also blame President Yoon for all the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, not just in the past week, but over the past several months. And they see it as an opportunity to likely implicate the U.S. as being involved in it, as they accuse the U.S. of being involved in the 1980 Gwangju incident. On the other hand, there is a danger of them highlighting through pictures the large demonstrations that are occurring in South Korea, because they're indirectly giving the message to North Korean citizens that this is what freedom of assembly is like. This is what freedom of expression is like. This is how democracy works, as messy as it is. It does show the checks and balances, especially on the power of the executive. So those are all alien ideas to North Korean citizens. And I would think the regime would have to be a bit careful in highlighting it too much, because it might give the North Korean citizens ideas of why can't we demonstrate against our leadership?
Right. And some analysts suggest that the prolonged political instability in South Korea could be advantageous to North Korea. What's your view on this?
I agree. They would see benefit in both the prolonged turmoil with the president remaining in power, and then eventually a change in government, which the opposition party would likely win a special election, and their policies are much more in line with North Korea's intentions and desires. So in the near term, the turmoil, they see it as the country ripping itself apart. It's the political system seems to be a circular firing squad now, with police arresting their own, the Minister of Defense being arrested for treason and attempted suicide, and then the president under investigation for committing treason. So it's a way for North Korea to exploit or at least benefit from this political turmoil, the internal divisions, and the hyper partisanship that will now occur. And then eventually, when the system continues and there's an election, they will see the Democratic Party's policies as much more conducive to achieving North Korean strategic objectives.
Now, U.S. Secretary of State Lloyd Austin stated that he does not see a heightened risk of North Korean provocations at the moment. But given the current political instability in South Korea, Dr. Klinger, is there a risk that North Korea might take advantage of the situation to, escalate tensions on the peninsula?
Well, while there are questions right now as to who's in charge in South Korea, who's the commander-in-chief, whether it's the prime minister or the president, certainly the intelligence communities of both South Korea and the United States, the militaries, would have a very heightened focus on North Korean military activity. When I was in the CIA, we had a list of things that we observed every day and every night about North Korean military activity and whether they were a precursor to some kind of military attack or conflict. I don't think North Korea will take advantage of this militarily. They're benefiting it diplomatically and propaganda-wise. I don't think they would take advantage by trying to do a large-scale military attack. In 1980, South Korea was in much greater turmoil, much greater instability, and North Korea's military forces compared to South Korea were in a much stronger position, and they didn't act at that point. And then people ask, well, what about tactical provocations? Would they be more likely to do that? And they've been already doing that quite often this year as well as previous years. So, I think we might misinterpret any future missile launch or tactical clash along the DMZ, the Northern Limit Line, is because of this situation in South Korea, but it's things that were already occurring frequently on the peninsula.
Right, so they could benefit more in terms of, diplomacy and other areas. Now, Dr. Go, given the ongoing political turmoil in Korea and, of course, the absence of a defense minister currently, how do you assess the country's ability to maintain a coherent defense strategy in the event of, a possible North Korean escalation?
Well, first of all, when it comes to defense of South Korea, there are several layers, several mechanisms that are, overlapping, also redundant, to ensure that the country is always well defended. So, for instance, when it comes to the absence of a defense minister, there's an acting defense minister in charge. So though clearly the previous one is under investigation, has been arrested, and is under detention, but then the deputy minister has assumed the role of the acting defense minister, so that position is not vacant. But then clearly Bruce is right in the sense that it's not clear exactly whether President Yoon is a commander-in-chief, whether his duties have been suspended, as some people have indicated. So this uncertainty is a little bit an issue. But then, unlike in other countries, South Korea is a treaty ally of the United States. We have the U.S. forces in the country, and then U.S. forces in South Korea and the South Korean militaries, they have a unity of command where they are combined under a single command, where it's the Combined Forces Command. So even though the South Korean governments might not be able to mount a unified or immediate response to North Korean provocations, God forbid attacks. We have the United States forces essentially backing South Korea up. So this overlapping mechanism of command as well as forces will ensure that South Korea remains well defended against any threats, including one from North Korea.
Right, so the vacancy won't be big at this point. Now, the trilateral high-level talks between South Korea, U.S., and Japan on North Korea's nuclear program, actually, it took place as scheduled on the 9th, despite other events such as, the visit of U.S. Defense Secretary Austin being canceled. And what do you think this implies at this moment? The trilateral talks, it took place. What kind of topics do you think have been discussed in the meeting?
Well, just the gathering itself is a signal. It's a very assuring signal, not just for people in South Korea, but also our partners and neighbors, even to North Korea, in the sense that even though there's a political turmoil going on in Seoul right now, when it comes to security, it's business as usual. So just the gathering itself projects the image, or perception of normalcy in Seoul, and as well as our relationship with our partners and allies. So this was a very important symbolic moment, even though in that sense, the agenda item that has been discussed in the meeting is less, relatively speaking, less noteworthy. But nonetheless, even the discussion, topic of discussion, essentially stuck to the usual discussion items. This idea that there's a constancy is very important in a moment like this. Constancy essentially is the foundation of perception of normality in the country, as well as our external relations, and also it has a huge positive implications for our defense posture. So I think in that sense, the meeting has been very timely and then also significant.
Right, so it shows how much important that we're taking that issue is. Now, Professor Klinger, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin emphasized that the South Korea-U.S. defense cooperation remains strong. But if South Korea's political turmoil continues for a longer period of time, do you think it would affect the bilateral alliance or the trilateral alliance between South Korea, U.S., and Japan?
Well, the underlying alliance structure is very strong. As Dr. Go points out, there's the Combined Forces Command. We have our treaty obligations to defend South Korea. And U.S.-South Korea relations have had ebbs and flows in our long-term relationship. And the alliance has weathered previous crises in South Korea as well as the United States. And relations at times have been strained over political or diplomatic differences, but the military structure and the military cooperation continued, and that will continue to be the case during this current political crisis. That said, there may be cancellations in military exercises. There may be standing down in certain actions. In some ways, the U.S. Doesn't want to look like it's condoning President Yoon's behavior, so there may be, as there was recently, a cancellation of senior level visits or coordination. On trilateral, that also may face some challenges, but I think even more so after a change in government in South Korea. We've seen the Democratic Party is much more nationalist in its approach towards Japan. It criticized President Yoon's outreach and reconciliation to Japan, accusing it of treason and being traitors to Korea's past. So I think under a Democratic Party administration, we're going to see if not cancellation of trilateral military exercises, quite a cooling in the relationship between Seoul and Tokyo. And so at a time when the U.S., with a new incoming administration is coming in, we're looking to our allies to assume larger, stronger roles in the Indo-Pacific against the encroaching Chinese threat. And now we have a weakened Japan because of change in leadership and the loss of majority in the legislature there. And now with South Korea, there's much greater uncertainty as to what Korea's policies will be in the future, not only towards Japan, but towards the alliance and towards North Korea and China.
Right. And world nations were quick to respond to the shocking news. And of course, China closely monitored the impeachment situation in South Korea. Now, while the Chinese government has refrained from making any official comments on the issue, there have been a lot of analysis on, the potential impact of this to the South Korea-China relations. What's your outlook?
Well, the turmoil in Seoul is taking place in a very pivotal moment, not just for South Korea, but also for the United States and China. I think the Chinese leadership was main concern about the incoming Trump administration was the policy continuity of pressure on China, whether this policy of pressuring China might go up by several notches under the second presidency of Donald Trump. And in any kind of a strategic move on the part of the United States pressuring China, Korea would have a very important role. And so the Chinese leadership has been very concerned about what kind of position South Korean government would assume under the second Trump administration. And then there was this, I would say, some begrudgingly acceptance that South Korean government under President Yoon will remain much, much closer to the United States than Beijing. And then they tried to somehow recognize the reality, and they've been engaged in a very positive outreach towards South Korea and the President Yoon's administration the last couple of months. But now their calculation is up in the air. So as Bruce has pointed out, there's uncertainty about the continuity of a new administration and also the associated South Korean policies with China, which has been very strong and very, I would say, very standing up to the Chinese pressure. But now there's a rising prospect of a different administration taking shape in the near future. And then that administration is going to be very likely be that of the opposition party, the Democratic Party, which has declared, has been very clear about its more neutral stance between Washington and Beijing, and has been expressing a much more positive attitude towards Beijing. So now the Chinese leadership has to somehow figure out how to somehow take into account these different factors and reflect them on their policy towards South Korea. And I think this is the reason why the Chinese government has been rather mute about the ongoing situation in South Korea, because they are more of a wait and see whether the fog of uncertainty will clear out. And then they're going to assume a position towards South Korea.
Right, so countries are calculating what will happen to the future of South Korea and their relationship. Now, in light of this political turmoil in the country, Dr. Go, what measures should the South Korean government take to ensure stability in the peninsula and also the Northeast Asian region?
Well, we have to essentially come up with much more clarity when it comes to our political situation. So right now, there's a constitutional process taking place. So the President Yoon might get impeached, might not be. It's not clear whether that's going to happen anytime soon. But then once that question is settled, I think there'll be the constitutional process. Then it's going to be much more predictable. And the South Koreans, we went through this already back in 2016. So essentially, we know what to expect. So once the impeachment process or something else takes place, and we know clearly whether President Yoon is going to be in office or not, then we can actually schedule our next political steps, perhaps a snap election to elect the new president, therefore new administration. And I think regardless of what kind of policy the next administration is going to assume, the clarity itself, the lack of uncertainty, is going to be extremely useful in settling down the the friction as well as the doubts that the international community has about the future of South Korea's policy. So I think settling our political process is it's a first task that we all face.
Right. And meanwhile, let's focus more on North Korea. North Korea has announced that it will convene a plenary session of the Workers' Party Central Committee by the end of the year. Dr. Klinger, what do you think could be discussed at this meeting?
I think there will be a number of standard issues that they would talk about, which then are proclaimed in their annual address. Certainly the status of the economy and a review of what has occurred in their economy in the past year, as well as military developments, reviewing the various accomplishments that the military development has had in the past year, and also previewing what will happen in what will be the final year of their 5-year plan that Kim Jong-un announced in January 2021, a very extensive agenda of nuclear and missile developments, as well as some conventional weapons. So that would be the standard parts. Also, I'm sure they would be talking about the incoming Trump administration and what policies North Korea would implement towards the U.S., predominantly whether it will be willing to re-engage with dialogue on President Trump, or whether it will continue to reject all meetings as they have for the past 5 years, not only during the Biden administration, but even during the last year of the Trump administration. And then certainly they'll be discussing how to respond to or exploit and take advantage of the situation in South Korea. So we're wondering whether we will see an initial signal from North Korea as to whether it will reach out to the U.S. or whether it would be more receptive to a U.S. outreach. So we're wondering, if there is a desire to re-engage between the U.S. and North Korea, which side will take the first step or send the first signal that they're willing to re-engage?
And Dr. Go, North Korea has also announced that it would hold a Supreme People's Assembly session on January 22nd, which is just a few days after Trump's inauguration. Given the timing, do you expect North Korea to leave a message to the Trump administration?
Well, the timing is very uncanny because the assembly meeting is taking place just 2 days after the President Trump's re-inauguration, so to speak. But then we have to consider the fact that when President Trump is inaugurated in January 21st, the local time in Washington, 20th here in Korea, he's not going to have a particular message towards North Korea. So there'll be no message coming from Washington. So I believe it kind of looks a little bit strange for North Koreans to respond to a lack of message from Washington about them. So I think there could be some hints on the future of better relations with the United States, but that could be essentially a very important sign, important and significant sign coming from Korea. But then that's a way to be seen. So for me, I think it's more about North Korea, essentially, as Bruce said, summarizing the achievements they have made in the past years and set the direction for the new year into 2025.
Right, so we'll have to see how the situation follows until next year. We'll have to leave our discussion right here. Many thanks to Dr. Klinger and Dr. Go. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
That'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.